so I think we can get started. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for coming. Today we'll talk about revolutionizing data privacy, new era of consent management. Just taking a quick poll to get people's familiarity with topics. Who here works in privacy or has worked in privacy? Okay, a lot of you. How many of you guys have ever, when you're browsing the web, seen a cookie consent banner? Much more of you. Nice. Yeah, so today we'll talk a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes for the consent management. So just a quick intro. My name is Suejung. I'm an engineer at a data privacy startup called Catch. We're actually right down the street in San Francisco. So data is founded by some data management veterans who implemented the strict privacy law in Europe back at Salesforce. And this was the startup, the software that they wish they had when they went through that very onerous endeavor. So Catch does a program approach to simplifying privacy ops and enabling permission data. And we have a lot of different privacy solutions, consent management, data-centric rights automation. This is going to be talking about consent management specifically. So just a quick summary of the stuff that we'll be talking about today. Just a little bit of background of what we're going to talk about, why you should care about it, where does consent management sit, and then go through a little bit of how we think about it, breaking it into the different pieces that go into that. And then a little bit of what you would think of next for the consent management, and leave some time at the end for questions. So starting a little bit with setting the stage, what are the market conditions requiring a new era of consent management? So when I say consent, I mean that users want to be able to have control and say how and where their data can be used. They consent to the use of data. So recently, a lot of privacy laws have been cropping up. It's been snowballing. There's been a huge focus as new regulators are making sure that because citizens are becoming more aware of their data privacy rights, that the right protections are put into place. Starting with GDPR and many other regulations, it's kind of snowballed since then. And by next year, majority up to 75% of global population, give or take, might be covered by some sort of modern privacy regulation. And it adds a lot of complexity because as each of these different regulations pop up, they might be slightly different, annoyingly. So the compliance solutions that the companies need to implement, whatever you come up with for one might not necessarily translate to another, and it's very expensive to go through the entire effort to make it happen. And it just creates a lot of complexity that is a big problem as the regulators want to make sure that the data subjects have their rights protected. Along the same landscape, so the reason for all these regulations is because people are becoming much more aware of their rights to their data. We ran a study and we're actually surprised to find that people value data privacy as a really important ethical issue, even more so than some other things like DE&I and sustainability. So it's top of mind for a lot of folks, and it's a growing concern to make sure that the laws are protecting consumer rights. At the same time, brands are increasingly using people's data in a more high-tech way in order to extract value from them and create very personalized kind of content. So they're unifying customer data to increase the revenue that they can get through personalized and insights from how people are using their product. A lot of new customer data platforms with customer data marketing tech, advertising tech have been modernized to be very high-tech operations. A lot of spend on media that are personalized ads that probably all of us today have seen, like where really is all my data out there? So this kind of creates a tension as the general populace is becoming more attuned to what their rights are, and that's their data, versus brands are still running their business and they want to make sure that they're getting the right targeted audiences to be able to reach the right people who want to buy their things or use their products. With the overarching landscape of like these privacy regulations exist to help like marry the two. So this is where we come into a general consent management platform to be the solution to help ease this tension and let it exist in harmony. So what are the set of rules, the software that helps this business collect, manage, store, use this personal data making sure that the consumer can decide where their data can be used, and then make sure that that's enforced on the back end. So this is what we're building at Catch. So just talking through a little bit about what we mean in consent management. So just to help us navigate and tell the story of what that means, can introduce some characters. Laura, who is our website visitor, she's just like you, me. At the end of a workday, she's logging into her computer. She wants to go shop for her upcoming trip on wanderwear.com, find a new travel backpack. Meanwhile, we'll also meet Avery, who works at Wanderwear. She's a privacy program manager there. She wants to make sure that all the consumer rights are protected, regulatory compliance boxes are checked, and we're not eroding customer trust by showing them ads that are following them when they said no. So what's involved in all of this to make sure that that happens, that exchange is, that handshake is harmonious? So we kind of break it down into 3 steps. So the first thing is just about presenting the right choices to the user so that they can have the level of discrete choice of what you're allowed to use data for or not. The second is collecting all the signals off the page of who they are and what they consent to. And then the last thing is orchestrating in the backend systems to make sure that those signals are propagated and respected. So we'll talk first a little bit about the first step, so presenting the choices to the visitor. So as a lot of people have seen, you see those cookie banners, it seems pretty easy, you just pop up the banner in the right place and then that's it. There's a little bit more complexity to that. So in general, the very simple requirements are show the compliant banner, show it everywhere that's required. Catch kind of thinks about this because we're selling this as a solution to any brand who wants to express themselves and earn their consumer trust. Create a flexible, customizable solution that lets you express your brand, and then also make sure that it performs fine and doesn't impact the performance of your page, and also it will scale across jurisdictions. So if you have one spot where regulation applies and then the next one comes up, you have a way to, without engaging developer resources, getting that on. So how does that work? So the quick thing before keep going, just like a quick aside, maybe most of the room knows, but for those that don't, what do I mean by tag? So web page is consisted of HTML. It might have some snippets of JavaScript running in there. The catch tag is just another one of those, some JavaScript that calls catch. And once you put that onto your web page, then catch will show the correct banner. So Avery, our privacy program manager, her job is to make sure that these displayed consent choices are correct across all the different privacy jurisdictions. So she can go into the software, say our brand is white and black. We want to make sure it has a seamless user experience and customize for a banner, a modal, different color. It might look different in Japan versus in US. And from there, you just put the one snippet of the code onto the page, and then it'll render the correct thing depending on where you come from. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So one of the things about this display step of the consent management solution is that because this is code that's running on our customers' pages, we want to make sure that it's not impacting their page performance. This is important when you're running a business and you want to show up at the right spot for your search rankings and conversion rates. If your page is really slow, then you might get bumped down. So to mitigate that, a couple of things that we do on the engineering side is make sure all the JavaScript code runs asynchronously instead of your code needs to wait for us to finish. Make sure that we're not blocking any of their operations. And then secondly, keeping the code modular so that some of our customers that might have a more heavyweight solution or more integrations required, they are not going to be, that size of bundle will be different for the very simple use case for that customer. So now that we've talked a little bit about what it means to build the presentation layer of just like the banner that shows up, now we get into the deeper parts of what happens after the user is able to select their choices. So collecting consent signals. So the very basic requirements for this is to only collect consented data. So one of the things that Catch thinks about for this is making sure you have a unified identity resolution engine. Talk a little about that. So who is Laura? It's complicated. There's a lot of complexity in figuring out who is Laura and making sure that when she consents somewhere, that consent is still her across all the different devices, all different identifiers. And it's also very high stakes. In California, the Attorney General recently had some enforcement actions about making sure that you have correct cross-device consent enforced. So what that means is when Laura is logged into her TV, say, that if she says, no, you can't use my data, and then later she is browsing on the internet, on the browser, that needs to be respected still there. Like that's still her, she still can't have data collected on her. This is tricky because Wonderware might have different identifiers associated with Laura, depending on how and where she's stored in all these different systems. So she might be a certain account ID when she's logged in to wonderware.com, but they might have transactions. Separately, she has her own user ID in Facebook that represents her, and getting those all together to represent her to do the cross-device consent is the problem that we're looking to solve. So how is that addressed? We look at identity synchronization. So identity synchronization is how we can enable this cross-device compliance. There's two parts to it. First is the identity graph assembly and then identity propagation. So at a very simple sense, identity graph assembly might just be a very fancy name of tying all these different identifiers together and knowing that that is all Laura. So she knows who she is, but this is a way to draw the connections between what the internet sees her as to all represent her. Identity propagation is then, now that we know that she's represented by all these different identifiers across devices, across all these different integrations, pulling it all together so that when she had said, no, you can't use my data, but she was logged into one computer, that propagates to all the identifiers that represent her in this graph so that her consent is aligned and synchronized across these identifiers. So this process can be a little tricky. So at a very high level, what we do is first we need to fetch the identifiers based on how it's configured. So Avery, she's our privacy program manager. She needs to make sure that she's only collecting the right information off the page. So she knows that when you're logged into wonderware.com, we're setting a cookie and then there's an account ID that you can pull from there. Separately, she's using some other integrations and each of those might put its own identifier on the page. So Catch allows you to configure where, like from a cookie, and what key to pull that information from so that now you can have those identifiers pulled on Laura that represent her. You send those along with the IP address to the Catch server, and then we resolve any conflicts, which I'll talk about, and then we return the consent. And if it's a new user, we'll show the banner so the consent can be collected at that time. Otherwise, we send the signal of yes or no of whether or not they've consented. So we'll talk a little bit about the resolving of consent conflicts. So the conflict resolution logic, so Catch behind the scenes is deciding whether or not Laura has consented for a device and an identity identifier that represents her. So an example of one of the resolvable conflicts that we can encounter is that say Laura had logged into wonderware.com and she consented to use your data. And then later, Avery at Wonderware, they instituted a new product metric tracking system in order to get more information about how their users are using their product. Because that system's new, at the time that that Laura had consented to use her data, that wasn't there, so it's null. But the next time she logs in, the resolution engine can understand that she had consented and propagate that to the other identifier that represents Laura. There also might be cases in which we have an unresolvable conflict. This might happen, for example, if there's conflicting results and under one identifier, she had opted out of use of data and the other she had it. In that case, if we can't resolve it, we would pop up the banner again and then we'll let her decide because she's the one who knows whether or not she wants data used in a certain way. So that's kind of the first challenges and the ways we've approached a consent management platform for displaying the right information across different jurisdictions, collecting the right consent signals that represent her across all devices. and then orchestrating. The next step would be orchestrating this on the back end across all the data systems. For a very basic, what it means to do orchestration, you just need to make sure that the consent choices are respected. I'll say that a lot of things in the past, like the first generation approach to consent management, kind of stops here. Like it never does the push to then have the data removed or the data no longer accessible when somebody says, no, you can't use my data. Catch has integrations with many different third parties, and it programmatically pushes a signal of what you're allowed to use data for or not. And then where there isn't an integration built out of the box, there's webhooks so that you can build your custom integration. So kind of an illustration of what it used to be. So a very first generation cookie management solution would have you set your cookies, say for a CRM, advertising, or analytics. And when you say you can't use my data, then those cookies would not be set. However, if they were there before, and then there was data on you before from those cookies, all of that would have to be done manually or by some other means to all the different downstream platforms to then remove the data if you're going to do consent correctly. And it seems that up until privacy laws have become, the privacy ecosystem has become more mature, this like second step might not always happen. So the way that Catch approaches it is we have purpose limitations with an automated solution. What I mean by purpose is it's very granular of what you're going to use the data for, that's purpose. And those are what the toggles are that a user can see, so they can decide this, you can use my data for, that you can't. And then we push to all of your different innovations. We use their native APIs in order to say these are on and these are off. And this is a listing of some of the kinds of categories of integrations that we think of. And customers can have data all over the place. Like even if you think your business is pretty simple, as businesses mature and rely more on tech, like you can see that there's lots of different use cases where you might introduce some third-party software. And as I mentioned, in the case where we don't have an integration out of the box, there's also a custom webhook solution. So you could build in-house a way to push the consent signals from the page, and you can have a customized way to in a standardized format to receive that in. So just a couple words on the future of consent management. So I think we kind of talked through what it looks like, the way that we've thought about it and built out a solution. Maybe in some future way, I think a lot of the UX around cookie banners and even the consent banners are very interruptive. I think as Laura is going about her shopping experience, she's just trying to get the stuff in her cart, and then these banners are popping up. Maybe what you can have instead is at the point of sale, she can decide, and do you want to opt in to seeing more things like this because you really like your travel backpack? She's like, yeah. And then only then is she prompted for this information. That could be some way in which consent management evolves. Another way you might be able to see this in the future is it'd be really nice for Laura to not have to fill out these different forms every time she goes to a different shopping website. So Wonderwear has one, and then she goes to Sephora or wherever, and like she has to fill one out every place. It might be nice in some future state to have that all in one place. But these are kind of like beyond, I think, the generation that we're in with the consent management solutions. So just to kind of wrap it up. So back to our friends, how have we done through this entire process of when we have walked through the consent management platform? Laura and Avery can exchange your data with trust. So through the 3 steps, we've kind of covered the ways in which we can make sure that the consent is respected, collected correctly and respected, presented to the visitor so it's very clear and it's compliant with the privacy regulations. You collect the signals, you pick up the right identifiers, and then you orchestrate it and actually send the signals to downstream systems. Yeah, so basically in conclusion, we're able to make it so that Laura's data only goes where she chooses it to go, and then Avery is confident, the privacy program manager, in her regulatory compliance, keep maintaining the customer trust, and also the business needs to do what they can to get their products in front of their customers. That's about it. Thank you. Have any questions?
Any question?
Yes.
So, this is a great presentation. Thank
Oh,
you.
thank
The
you.
platform is fantastic and it really solves a problem. So that's awesome. So outside of that, because I feel like you brought up some really interesting questions at the end, just around like, so what does this look like in the future?
Mhm.
So in general, I think like the bigger problems here, I mean, this solves, make sure that we're doing what we say we're supposed to be doing, which we need to be doing, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, I listened to a talk recently about the concept of murky consent and about that kind of coercion to click on all those boxes. So outside of this, right, I mean, you're really putting and I'm wondering how you feel about this, like placing the onus on the end user to sit there and as you mentioned, you know, they just want to buy some socks, right? And but it's a lot, it's a big commitment. And I even know, like, I don't want to be, you know, looking at all my data, but then, you know, I have a choice, all or only some, and I think, all right, fine, right? How are you personally thinking about all of this in the world based on what you've been exposed to?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually pretty funny because like I work in data privacy, but I think before I had this job, I like, you know, I was just one like, okay, cookie batter, go away, whatever. Like I don't really care. So, but now I like know what's more going on under the hood. I think one thing is it's like exactly what you're saying. The regulators have picked up on that. It's like you're not allowed to do dark patterns, as they call it. So like you can't like trick people as like no matter what the law says. Some people might still if there's like gray area, but so you can't do stuff like make it really hard to only say yes and make that button huge and make the other one tiny or something like that. So there are consumer protections in place in theory, and I think it's just getting better. So it's still evolving. It's gotten a lot further than it was.
Where do you think it should be? Where should it end up?
It's hard to say. I don't know. I think it's nice if it's in a world where like people can trust the brands and like you don't want. I think I actually kind of like personalized things in some cases, like because then it's like I don't care about lawnmowers. I don't even have a house, but so but like yeah, I don't know. I think there is a balance between the two.
Can you speak to technically how Catch responds to user choices on your consent banner versus recognizing like GPC or any of those like opt-out signals?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I am not our resident GPC expert, but what I know about that is that we set a string and we have identifiers related to that. And that one and TCF, these are all like privacy protocols that have its own way of saying who you are. And that is just one more of the identifiers that are tracked so that the consent is equalized.
So does like, do you recognize that tag and then do you present a banner that says, hey, we've recognized this, or do you just not present the banner at all? Like what would like the UX be?
Oh yeah. So I think like you can show the vendor list on the banner for the ones that apply case.
We have a place that is called privacy protocols under the consent piece of the application where you can turn on and you can enable.
Like from the company who's your client side, right?
Inside of Catch, but then yeah.
Okay. And then like what would the user, like the website visitor see?
Yeah, so they would see the vendors that are a part of like, you know, GCP or.
Right, but only if your customer has chosen to show that.
Yes,
Yes,
so
yes.
you can enable, so our customers can enable which protocols they want, so they can enable C or they can enable like a TCF or a GPP. So depending on what they enable, that's what we will do. We will create the strings and then it's whatever is being reading those strings, it's their job to recognize those strings.
Got it. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Good racist ladies.
I know, I love how you have like the
Was there another question back there?
I was gonna ask just like about, I don't know, you made it kind of like when you talked about like, oh, the TV and then the computer, like how centralized is it? Like in terms of if someone's, because then you talked about like having specific, I don't know. Okay, so like if you're saying you don't want your data collected on like one specific website, does it just apply to every single other thing, electronic device you use?
Yeah, so it's Right, yeah, so it's a great question. So I think some of that like is part of how you configure the identifiers. So if you have a way to pick up the master account ID 123 Wonderware account from both the TV and mobile and browser, then as long as that thread is there, then you see what the consent choice associated with that is when it pops up in all those different places. In addition, on your TV or your phone, you might have like your iPhone might have the IDFA, like its specific identifier. So now you have like your master account one that's like the thread across all of them, and then all the individual ones on the devices as well.
And also, can you like put different permissions for different websites? Like you're like, this one can have my data and this.
At the moment, it's not at that discrete level because it's kind of like you've consented for a purpose, but the company has the ability to say like, you're allowed to use my data for analytics or marketing or personalization, say, and then they can create a different set of purposes on a different property. And in that case, like that choice can look different if the user goes there instead of here. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, it's like in a minute, but yeah, find any of us. Yeah, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much.